Morning.
Morning.
We are going to briefly convene the Board of Curators in order to install our new members. So, Cindy?
I have Curator Ross. We'll just have you come up one every time.
Okay.
Raise your hand, sorry.
Oh, raise it. Okay.
Repeat after me. I, Thomas Voss,
I, Thomas Voss,
do solemnly swear
solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Missouri,
and the Constitution of the State of Missouri,
and that I will faithfully demean myself
and that I will faithfully demean myself
as a member of the Board of Curators
as a member of the Board of Curators
of the University of Missouri System.
of the University of Missouri System.
Congratulations. I, John Sunbolt,
I, Johnson,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Missouri,
and the Constitution of the State of Missouri,
and that I will faithfully demean myself
and I will faithfully demean myself
as a member of the Board of Curators of the University of Missouri System. Congratulations. Curator Nelson? I, Mary Nelson,
I, Mary Nelson,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Missouri,
and the Constitution of the State of Missouri,
and that I will faithfully demean myself
and that I will faithfully demean myself
as a member of the Board of Curators
as a member of the Board of Curators
of the University of Missouri System.
of the University of Missouri System.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I, Patrick Graham,
I, Patrick Graham,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Missouri,
and the Constitution of the State of Missouri,
and that I will faithfully demean myself
and that I will faithfully demean myself
as the student representative to the Board of Curators
as the student representative to the Board of Curators
of the University of Missouri System.
of the University of Missouri System.
Okay, congratulations.
Thank you.
Cindy, Ms. Walker, Dr. Whitaker, you may have the floor.
Thank you, ma'am. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Jim Whitaker, for those who I haven't said hello to this morning, and on behalf of Cheryl Walker, my co-chair, we welcome each and every one of you for our first face-to-face live presidential search committee meeting. Also want to extend on behalf of Cheryl a welcome to Mary and John and Tom and Patrick. We appreciate you all saying yes and look forward to working with you. We have a full agenda, so let's get right after it. And I'm going to introduce Kelly Stuck, who's going to talk about some HR training for us. Kelly?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see everyone here in person. This morning's information is simply that, information only, and to kind of provide a background for our process as we move forward in selecting the next president for the University of Missouri. This is really the first time that we've convened since we began the active recruitment early in May. And as recruitment efforts continue, it's really positive. We're really pleased with the progress that's been made so far. But we also want to make sure that you all feel confident and prepared as you move forward in the process to consider the candidates that have been nominated. This presentation will provide just a high-level look at how the committee will move through the steps to recommend candidates as finalists to the Board of Curators later in the process. First, we'll talk about the candidate pool composition, how the committee will evaluate the pool once it's developed, and then our subsequent approach to interviewing semifinalists and finalists. So on this first slide, it just kind of provides the overview that I talked about and talks about the steps or the process that we'll go through. So first, we'll evaluate the candidates on paper. The second step is actually interviewing the candidates that rise to the top. Then we will further evaluate to arrive at finalists. There is an assessment process that we'll talk about later in the presentation today. And finally, we'll complete the referencing process for those candidates. So when we think about how the process works from the beginning to end, we tend to think about it as a funnel that gets narrower as we go through the process. So we have John Isaacson and Bud Mosley here from Isaacson Miller to assist us today, as well as two other members of their team. And they are working to diligently build a pool of candidates for us to consider. As they build that tool, or that pool, they're looking at diversity in terms of backgrounds, profiles, demonstrated experience, and demographics for you as a search committee to review and consider. Through the summer and fall, you'll have the opportunity to review this candidate pool, and throughout the process, they'll provide consultation to you as we consider the elements each candidate offers. So a little bit more about the building blocks of the committee. As I mentioned, the Isaacson Miller team are building the pool, and they're generating a lot of positive interest in the community, as are you as you're out talking with individuals about our search. Many of the names have been surfacing as nominees into the process, and we anticipate that more nominees will come forward as the process continues throughout the summer. As that happens, Isaacson Miller will evaluate those candidates, research their background and experiences, and help to bring that information to the search committee for you to consider. My team and I have been engaged with Isaacson Miller to really monitor the development of the pool so far. And as I mentioned, we really feel positive that we are on track to develop a strong pool of candidates for this position. I'd like to ask Isaacson Miller, John Isaacson, to speak for a minute about their experience with the pool thus far.
Right. So thank you, Kelly. We're very pleased with where we are in the search at the moment. We've been reaching out broadly all across the country for people who have experience that would be highly relevant to this role. And we've had a surprise, and a pleasant surprise, which is that the ratio of people who say no to us, we call them declines, and the ratio of people who say yes is much more positive than we expected, better than it is in most large public university searches. That ratio is running about 1.5 to 1, so we've got, 1.5 times no to every one yes. It's usually 2 or higher in a public university search. So that's a tribute, by the way, I think, to the search committee and to all the work that was done here by your team ahead of time, some work from us as well, on preparing the case for Missouri. That is, we've been able to make a good case for this system, and people have responded to it. So we're very pleased where we are. That doesn't mean we're out of the woods, folks. We're only halfway through building this pool and probably only a third of the way through this search, but so far, so good.
Thank you, John, and it looks like we've added some ambiance to our meeting this morning. As John mentions, it is early in the process, and so I want to continue to encourage you as a committee to use your networks, people in the university community as large who may be listening to use your networks, because we need to continue to be diligent about using our networks to increase the number of nominees. So next let's talk about kind of how we move into the process of evaluating the candidates. So we'll really use 3 main elements to evaluate the candidates. One is a candidate rubric, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. We'll use a series of personal interviews, which the committee will conduct. And then we'll also use an assessment generated from a third party that provides supplemental evaluation of the candidate's talents and abilities. First, I'm going to talk about the rubric as we move forward in the process. This is a very common tool that is used in searches today. It often helps to distinguish at a very early stage kind of the most desirable and the least desirable candidates in terms of experiences and abilities that they provide to us. In order to ensure that we are diligent about evaluating each committee member as fairly and equitably as possible, we use a candidate to introduce, or a rubric to introduce discipline into the process. It serves as both a checklist for qualifications for the committee, which we've set forth as critical, and that would be the qualification statement that we developed early in the process, as well as helps to evaluate the candidate experience that they provide in addition to us on paper. It provides kind of a quantitative approach to the supplemental third piece of the pie, which is the assessment later in the process. So this is a very high-level look at the rubric that we will use. If you look horizontally across the top, the criteria that's listed there directs back to the qualifications document that you developed earlier in the process. And so those are the criteria that we will look at when we begin to evaluate these candidates. And then down the left side of the grid is, of course, the candidates. Presented in no particular order, but with the information that they have provided, such as resumes, vitaes, other information that they feel is important in representing their skills and abilities to you as a committee. Once we get further in the process, we will actually begin to score candidates. These scores are not a definitive decision on candidates, but they do help differentiate between those candidates that tend to rise to the top as we go through the exercise and those candidates that may provide less experience and abilities that are related to those that we are looking for. So again, just kind of more in summary, the value of a candidate rubric is that it provides a structure early in the process for us to evaluate the candidate's capabilities, and it makes us focus on the necessary skill sets and experiences in relationship to those that we have identified as desirable. Additionally, this kind of discipline can help lessen or minimize the impacts of our own biases, whether those are imaginary or explicit. And so the cumulative effort based on the criteria approach gives extra validity to our process, and it creates a framework for us to make sure that we evaluate each candidate along the same structure. It's important to note that it's not expected or recommended that those who rise to the top are the perfect candidate. Again, it's just a method of differentiating among the pool as we begin to dive deeper into a candidate's background and experience. Oops, went one too far. So once we've evaluated the candidates and we've narrowed the pool to decide which of those candidates would we like to speak with, we look forward to what we call semifinalist interviews. We do those over a series of meetings and discussions among the search committees, and we will deliberate on each candidate. So often, this first round of interviews you may hear are referred to as airport interviews, and that's because sometimes, literally, they're held close to an airport to make it convenient for both the committee and the candidates to meet face-to-face. We will interact with a broad set of candidates at that time because we want to be more inclusive rather than exclusive. These will be candidates that we have evaluated based on the matrix and that have risen to the top as a result of that. So the intended outcome of that is to further narrow the candidate pool. As it mentions here in kind of that middle line, these interviews will be about 75 to 90 minutes long, so they're not real long. And I'm going to talk next about why we create that structure and how we make sure that the time amount that we have is appropriate to the candidates. So let's take a closer look at the interview structure and how we walk through it. As a committee member, this step will be your opportunity face-to-face to get a personal feel for the candidates, as well as for them to get an impression of us as a university and of you who represent the university in this process. This approach is structured in order to maximize the learnings on both sides of the equation, because we will be evaluating candidates, but in turn, candidates will be evaluating us and the opportunity that we are offering. At this point in the process, as I mentioned, there's a limited amount of time dedicated to each candidate. However, we believe it's enough time so that we can form strong impressions of those candidates that we interview. It's important for the committee to focus on this interaction as the best time to learn as much as you can about those candidates in this first round. This knowledge will guide your deliberations and further helps to separate out candidates and for those who will rise to the top and move further in the process. So a little bit more on the structure of the interview. We want to be sure and ensure that each committee member has a role and a voice in these semifinalist interviews. All persons on the committee have a purpose for being on that committee, and each of you represent a larger stakeholder group. And so it's important to ensure that each of you have a voice in the interview. It's likely that we may assign topics or decide amongst us how to split up the topics in the interview questions, and so that's where the structure comes in. Other committee members can add comments or explore an area further if something arises, but we do need to be cognizant of the time because it's important that each candidate is asked the same set of interview questions to ensure that each candidate has the same opportunity to explore and provide us with their background, skills, and experience. The co-chairs traditionally have a more visible role. They will kind of be the directors of the process. They may guide the conversation. They'll help us with time and logistics. So if we get off course, they may act to pull us back on course. And they'll work to engage the committee and the candidates as we move forward. So then when we go further and talk about actual interview questions, we'll bring some suggested questions to you for your consideration, and as a group we'll identify which of those we think are most appropriate for that part of the process. At this point, we're focusing mainly on the candidate's skills and abilities, and that's really what we want to zero in on. The committee sometimes has a desire to jump to the end game and ask, what would you do in this role? Or what's your vision for this role? Or what would you do in this situation? And I would encourage the committee to really focus on asking questions about the skills and abilities. Too often, time in an interview goes very fast, and if you go down the path of future state, you could end up with the candidate giving their vision and us ending the interview without a good feel for that candidate's skills and abilities. So that's why we kind of introduce discipline into the process. So we'll focus the interview questions on that previous experience. We'll explore in depth how they have interacted in their work experience and try to evaluate how that work experience and those abilities may relate to the qualifications that we have identified. This is the lens that should be on the candidate, what their past abilities and experiences are, what they have accomplished to date. There'll be plenty of time to explore future state in future interviews for those candidates who move forward. So the other thing that I would encourage you to do in that process is to ask open-ended questions. An example might be briefly describe your background with a focus on experience that you believe prepared you for this role. That provides the candidate an open end to highlight those things in their experience that they feel are most related to our qualifications, and also kind of gives you a feel for how the candidate thinks and puts information together, which is important. So there's always a cautionary tale in every story, and that's what I'm going to talk about here. Remember that we do have equal opportunity, employment opportunity guidelines that prohibit certain questions from being asked. So we will have a give and take discussion. We want the discussion to be as free-flowing and as comfortable for both us and the candidate as possible. And sometimes this, as you become a little more relaxed in your discussion, the conversation could lead you down paths that are not appropriate for an interview. And so this is provided here, just in kind of a stoplight approach, is guidance on those areas, with the red side being those things, those areas that we should refrain from exploring in an interview process, and understanding that the candidate may speak to those areas, but it is not up to us to further question or explore those areas, even if the candidate brings those up in the conversation. So as the committee evaluates the candidates, each of you will form a set of impression of those candidates. It'll be important for you to openly share and participate in our discussion, because that's a part of how we come to consensus on the candidates that will move forward. As a reminder, it'll be tempting because you may run across candidates who you know somebody who knows the candidate, and so it's always tempting to reach out and ask questions about those candidates. But as a caution at this part in the process, that could jeopardize our candidate pool. So I encourage you to remember that confidentiality is critical, and there will be a time when we will reach out further into our networks and explore finalist candidates, but in these early stages, it's not the time, and we have to remember that we have to protect the candidates and protect our pool in the process. So after we do the interview, we'll do a brief kind of 15-minute wrap-up to kind of share some initial impressions. We'd like you to share what you believe, how firmly you believe it, and any concerns that you might have about the candidate. And then we'll try to bring the committee to a consensus regarding those candidates that move forward. And as we narrow that funnel and get further in the process, Isaacson Miller will conduct a battery of references and background checks on those individuals that we want to move forward, and that information will come back to you as a committee. So I'm going to talk next about the assessment process, because it sometimes is the part of the process that people are less familiar with. There are multiple types of screening assessments. The method of the use of assessments is usually performed by a third-party organization. It's used to identify, explore, and really validate the committee's impressions from the intelligence that you have gained, looking at their knowledge and skills. But what the assessment is going to focus on is more of their talents and natural tendencies. And so it really is kind of a third piece of the structure that's difficult to get to from the interview and the paper review process. A candidate's knowledge and skills is often generated and can be evaluated through those first two pieces of the pyramid there. But this really helps to explore their natural talents. And so we think it's an important part of the process. And the candidates are being notified as they enter the pool that this will be a part of our process. So briefly, let's talk about kind of where we are today, just to level set. At this point, the Isaacson Miller team is continuing to develop the candidate pool and doing so very well, as we said. They will continue to bring us information and work diligently to gain more awareness about the candidates that have been nominated into the pool and to help us identify the strongest candidates. Most critical today is the effort on behalf of the committee and leadership and people across the UM system to continue to encourage nominations. Again, while we feel very positively about the pool that is developing so far, it's an ongoing process, and we want to actively continue to pursue that. So thank you for your time and attention today. I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Okay, if there are no questions, we will move on to the next item on our agenda, which we need to approve the minutes from our last two meetings, actually. So with that, I would entertain a motion. Hopefully you guys have had an opportunity to review them in advance of today, and I'd entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
It's been moved and seconded. Roll call, or do we need to do a roll call?
Yes.
Roll call.
Mr. Bain?
Yes.
Dr. Clark-Ekan?
Yes.
Curator Cups? Mr. Golden?
Yes.
Curator Graham?
Yes.
Curator Henriksen?
Yes.
Curator Nelson?
Abstain?
Curator Phillips?
Yes.
Dr. Shonakan? Curator Snowden?
Yes.
Curator Steelman?
Yes.
Curator Sunbold?
Abstain.
Curator Voss?
Abstain. Yes.
Ms. Walker?
Yes.
And Dr. Whitaker?
Yes.
Okay. All votes in favor.
Thank you. At this point, I would also recommend a motion to move into executive session so that we can move forward on our agenda with discussion of specific candidates.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Roll call.
Mr. Boehm?
Yes.
Dr. Clark-Kong?
Yes.
Mr. Golden?
Yes.
Curator Graham?
Yes.
Curator Henriksen?
Yes.
Curator Nelson? Curator Phillips?
Yes.
Curator Snowden?
Yes.
Curator Steelman?
Yes.
Curator Sunbull?
Yes.
Curator Voss?
Yes.
Ms. Walker?
Yes.
And Dr. Whitaker?
Yes.
Okay, you have all votes in favor.
Thank you. Okay, all right, so we will convene across the hall. Is that correct?
Yeah, actually just down the hall
Okay.
in Don Ray.